The genius behind the Springboks has been exposed in the most recent Chasing the Sun episode. In today's video, I'm going to give you my review and opinion on episode 3 of Chasing the Sun 2 and expose the genius behind the Springboks. So episode 3 starts off where episode 2 left off. After the loss of the Irish game, Rassie calls a team meeting on the Monday morning and kind of just shits out the players. We're kind of calling them out for their performance against Ireland, that they sort of accepted the loss, that they didn't put their bodies on the line as much as they should have. And he also calls out certain players and asks them if they're getting too big for the game, if their ego is getting bigger than their abilities, and sort of checks the likes of Siya Kolisi, Eben Etzebeth and Dwayne Vermeulen, who are the leadership group within the Springboks. Kind of says to them, you haven't been added to the quarter-final team so far, you're going to have to play against Tonga and prove yourself. And it also seems like there was a little bit of difference in opinion between Eben Kolisi and Dwayne Vermeulen. Dwayne obviously says that Kolisi and Eben Etzebeth grew up together, have come through the ranks together, so they're super tight, and sort of I got the feeling that Dwayne was sort of on the outer of the leadership group, but they did seem to come together and eventually sort the leadership stuff out. Then it goes in to Siya Kolisi and his injury before the Rugby World Cup. 4 months before, he's playing for the Sharks and he tears his ACL. Now, an ACL injury typically takes about 9 months to recover from, so Siya Kolisi was definitely against a ticking time bomb, but they showed his progression day in and day out, putting in the work, and he said that all he wanted to do was put in as much effort as he could to try and be back for the World Cup, which, as we know, inevitably happened. The Springboks go on to win the Rugby World Cup, and now Siya Kolisi has been nominated for the comeback of the year within sports as a whole. So I don't think at the time we knew how seriously good of a comeback that was, but now looking back on it, now that South Africa have won the World Cup 4 months prior to that, Siya Kolisi gets a very, very serious injury. I mean, you just have to give him props as a leader, as a rugby player, as a man, to get himself out of that mental block and straight back into the recovery room to try and make it in time for the Rugby World Cup to start. Then sort of once they get past all of that, it's now the build up and lead up to this French game. Obviously, South Africa played Tonga after Ireland, which is where Andre Pollard got a bit of a run, which is probably the perfect game, the perfect side to play against before knockout stage rugby, because they're physical, they're big men. It's not going to be just a walk in the park, and the Springboks weren't just going to run over them. So it did give them that perfect test. I did think a very specific and interesting comment came out of Rassie Erasmus's mouth during one of those meetings, is that if Lebok is kicking well, he's by far our best 10. So maybe that's also a bit of an indication for who they're going to go with this year. If Lebok is kicking well, I also agree he's probably better than Pollard, but Pollard's in the team because he kicks those last-minute penalties against France, against England, against New Zealand. So if Lebok can sort out his kicking, I do think we'll probably see Manie Lebok in a Springbok number 10 shirt for the majority of this year. And then the episode kind of goes straight into the France game and how big this France game was, how good the French were. I mean, in 2019 for the World Cup, South Africa had to play Japan in Japan and ended up knocking them out. This time, they're facing the host nations in a quarterfinal in Paris. There was kind of this feeling, like they said, that France had already done it. They were the best team in the world. They had the best player in the world in Antoine Dupont. And it kind of felt like the atmosphere was that this was France's year. But that is when South Africa are at their most dangerous. When you underrate them, when they're the underdogs coming in to a game or a World Cup, that is when they will surprise you. France also, I mean, with their French flair, the physicality, and a really good kicking game, was always going to be a very, very difficult matchup against the Springboks. We saw what they did against New Zealand in that first game, that opener. They absolutely trounced New Zealand. And this is where I'm going to get into the genius of the Springboks. I don't think the genius of the Springboks comes down to one person. It comes down to the collective group that they have and the coaching staff and the players that they bring in. Because they kind of break it down. How are France going to analyze the Springboks? Well, Rassie and the coaching staff had played 6 different teams in the build-up to this game against France. So they couldn't identify regular threats, regular players, regular combinations, which is going to make it a lot more difficult for that French side. The Springboks also go that extra mile. They play that video game where all the players control themselves, and that's where they found the purple move, where Rassie identified that France kind of overload the back, and then there's space out wide. If we leave a couple of forwards there, Manie can put a pinpoint cross kick, put a lot of pressure on them, and then it worked in the game. Damian De Allende ended up scoring in the corner. So I feel like the South African game, the Springbok game, is where preparation meets perfection. They prepare so much for these games. I mean, they even go to the lengths of practicing indoors so that there's no cameras around. Rassie Erasmus played the French anthem for the entire week in the build-up to this French game. Jason Colby studying Ramos's kicking routine so that if it came down to it, he could chase down a kick, which is exactly what happened in the game. It's these small, micro, little things that the Springboks do that each person in the camp does, studies a little bit longer, prepares a little bit longer. What if this happens? What if that happens? Which makes them, when they come together, the mighty Springboks, as they say in this episode 3. The game then starts against France, and France are putting South Africa under the absolute blender. They started them so fast, turned them around with kicks, which is why South Africa couldn't impose their physicality on them. France ended up scoring within 3 minutes, and then Eben Etzebeth makes a very good tap back. It was, I would say, very lucky, but it is what kept South Africa in the game. If the Springboks end up going 14-0 down there, then they are really in some serious trouble. But then Reinach puts a kick through for Arendse. Curtly Arendse has a very good game, picks up the scraps, ends up scoring in the corner. And then France score again. It's a bit of a ding-dong battle, but then Ramos goes to try and convert that kick. But Jason Colby has studied his routine inside and out as the quickest player on the South African side. He runs and he charges down that kick for Ramos, which inevitably we know now that the Springboks won that game by 1 point, could be the difference maker in that game. I think adding on to this genius behind the Springboks was also Damian Willemse's historic scrum call off a mark. The coaching staff identified that the French forwards just chill in the middle of the field when there's a kick battle, and they use that time to recover. So instead of just engaging in a kick battle, let's call a mark in our own 22, back our scrum to get a penalty and make the French forwards work more, which inevitably could have also been the reason why South Africa ended up winning that game, because 1 or 2 more scrums in a game is a lot more physical than them just chilling on the halfway line, catching their breath. So, I mean, there's just so much that has been unpacked in this episode. We're only halfway through the French game and we already have so much insight, but I really wanted to emphasize the fact that I think the genius behind the Springboks doesn't just come down to one person. It comes down to the work ethic of everyone within that camp. Everyone going the extra mile, from Siya Kolisi trying to get back into that Springbok side, trying to recover from that injury before the World Cup, to Jason Colby studying enough to chase down that kick, to Damian Willemse calling the scrum from the mark because they want one extra scrum against the French players because they know that they're fitter than them, to playing music, the French anthem, for a week in advance, to not training outdoors but rather indoors so that no camera footage can be leaked. It's just all these little things that the South Africans can put together very nicely into a final product that ends up winning them the Rugby World Cup. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. You agree or disagree with me? I thought it was a very good episode. I think we're building up. Episode 1 was over here, episode 2 was here, and now episode 3 is over there, and it's only gonna get better. Let me know what you guys think. If you haven't, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take it easy. Peace.